Our first performer is J.P. Frary in 3D graffiti. J.P. has recently started making art that he hangs up of in the world. He places his work on abandoned buildings and telephone poles and gets to anonymously watch people's reactions to them. He wants to tell a story of artistic discovery, but without an ending. And now J.P. Frary in 3D graffiti.
What Zoom saying, is it better to be, can they see everywhere? Do we know?
Yeah, you're well seen.
Okay. I make things with my hands and my brain. And that's unique. It really is. And it's a lucky thing that I get to do. I started out right out of college working for law firms. I worked in politics. I worked for Jerry Brown for a year. And I was working for a law firm when a crane fell in downtown San Francisco and it killed me. And this attorney and I were on the street walking to work when the crane fell, and there was mayhem. There were injured people. We didn't know if people we worked with were killed by this crane because it hit the building that we were both walking towards. And when we saw this crane landed on a cab, glass from the cab hit both of us. And I sprung an action. My instinct took over and I was helping people and helping take this woman out of the cab. And then I realized that I was the only person, I was a coordinator at this law firm, and I was the only person that had a phone list. And I raced into the building to get this phone list to call people to find out if people that we knew were on the street, if they were killed. And the attorney, the next day, came into me and said, "What are you doing here? Like, this is the most boring job on earth. You should be doing something different." And that really planted the seed in me of I shouldn't be in office. But I didn't know how to do anything else. I had put myself through college working as a plumber, and a friend of mine who was a contractor asked if I would be his plumber. And so I left the office role and went to work as a plumber. And the first job we were working on, I saw a window seat being built by these carpenters. And it was interesting. And it was interesting to see the aesthetic choices that were made. And why is this thing thick and why is that fat? I didn't take a shop class in high school. Didn't have tools of my own. I didn't do anything with my hands that was artistic. But I asked if I could work with those guys on the next project, and he said, "No, man, woodworkers are a dime a dozen. Plumbers are hard to get." And so I had to kind of fight my way into it. And there was a house that needed a mantle, and I had an idea for taking railroad ties and turning them into a mantle. It was a horrible idea because railroad ties are filled with chemicals, smelly, but it looks cool. And within a year, that's all I was doing for a living was making things. Very fortunate for me. A wonderful thing to be able to make somebody something, a table, kitchen cabinets, these utilitarian things you're going to make a lot of choices on for how it looks. And it's great. And for 20 something years, I've done it. But I also realized that there were things that I liked that weren't utilitarian. And it did something to me to just work with them. But you have kids, you have a mortgage, you have car payment, you have insurance, you have all these things. And the idea of just exploring art, even though I enjoyed doing it, it had to be on the side. It had to be a tiny little part. And I would have something that I thought was cool looking, and I would just put it up. The first thing that I did artistically, where I could really say it was a sculpture, was I was cutting stairs. When you cut out stringers, that's what the steps do. You have to cut these little triangles out. And so the steps go where the triangles go, and the risers go like this, and the stairs go there. But I had all these triangles left over, and I just reassembled them, and I made a bird. If you want to see what the bird looks like, you can go to your phone right now and type in my name, J.P. Frary, And the first thing that would come up is a website, and there is a picture of these birds that are hanging on the wall. And you're totally welcome. Those birds I made in 20, 30 different versions over the years, every time I made sticks. But I never went and cut triangles. I just used what was left over from something I was already making. That led directly to things like this. Whoa. Where there's wood left over from something that I have to turn into something else. I'm fascinated with triangles and circles. Why? I don't know. But I am now exploring this more than I'm doing anything else. I have a unique situation in that I have all the skills to make anything that comes in my brain. But I'm a kindergarten when it comes to what I'm making. I'm an infant in art. I haven't done it for a living. I haven't studied it. I didn't go to art school. So I get an idea and I make it. And whatever that idea is, it doesn't have to be real. But it could be based on something real. And I mean, there's all these things where you try to find a sexy shape. When you just look at nature, and there's lots of sexy shapes. So I made a couple of bugs. This is out of steel. I got a plasma cutter, so I can just freehand cut things. But I made some out of wood first, and I don't have a place to put them. I don't have a relationship with the gallery. I don't have anything set up in my life for how to show this work. So I brought them to the moth and just put one of these wooden moths on stage when for the first show to come back after the pandemic. And the reaction from the audience was unbelievable. And we ended up using it and we auctioned it off. So if you joined as a member of the Freight and Salvage, you got a raffle ticket and you could possibly win the moth. And we sold a whole bunch of raffle tickets. So all these people joined the $300 level. So I was like, oh, it is worth something. Kind of at the same time, I started taking the things that I made and hanging them outside my window where I worked. Now I work in a building on the old Naval Air Station in Alameda, which is near the new ferry stop. So cars were by my building. And the first thing I put up was some of the triangle-shaped birds. And I made them look, these particular birds, I made them look like pelicans diving. And the water is right in front of my building where the ferry comes in, and the pelicans dive there. So I just kind of, that was what was in my mind when I made them. Well, I saw people pulling over their cars. So I know there's something there. So it just took me down this road. Now, I don't know what this is. I don't know what it is, but I'm fascinated by the shape. I'm fascinated by the idea that it can look different if you just change which way it's going. It means something totally different, but I can't tell you what it means. Most of the things that I make aren't representational like this, but man, do people love bugs. And if you look at that website, there's the first section on my website, there's a little thing that says marsh, and that just has pictures and stuff. There is a beetle that I made, and originally was actually a wooden balloon that I cut in half and added legs to. So it is a thing, but the truth is it's totally abstract. This isn't a bug. This is a piece of metal that I carved to make it look like a bug. And the more that I started thinking about that, the more I started thinking about symbols and how everything that we do is a symbol. If you draw a picture of a thing, it's not a thing, it's a symbol of a thing. And that put my mind in this whole other place, where I started making things that appeared to be symbols for something, but really weren't. And this is this thing where I'm a kindergarten. And anything that I could draw or think about drawing, I can now make. But I can make it out of something cool, and I can make it out of something more real. I don't have any idea if anybody would really buy this for some number where I could make a living at it. But every time I hang something up out in the world, I see people, I see them take pictures of it. I see them pull over in their car. Now I've got this great captive audience of a gallery where I just hang a thing up and people don't see it. I made a bunch of booths out of wood. I don't know what else to call them. They're round booths. And I hung them on people's fences. And then I saw them gone and appear on somebody else's fence. And I went and I knocked on the guy's door and said, hey, which hit it? He admitted it, stole them off the other fence. I made a thing that somebody wants to steal. That's better than somebody buying it. That means he was willing to get out of his car, unscrew it from the fence and take it to his house. So part of this thing for me, this exploration, is I have a skill set. I have 30 years of working with my hands, and an idea that comes in my head, I can. Now, I've made a living making tables, making chairs, making benches, making kitchen cabinets, making utilitarian things. And I have clients that have bought a piece 20 years ago, and I've gone into their house when they're buying another piece, and I get to see a table that I made, and I see people using it. And that's an amazing lucky thing. Very few people get to be that lucky in life. So create a thing that people use and use and use and use and will hand down to their kids. That's a kind of fame. It's a kind of appreciation that really very few people get to experience. And I've got to experience that thing. But now when somebody wants me to make a table, my brain kind of goes, I've done it. I've made all the tables I want to make. I don't want to do another set of kitchen cabinets. But I don't know where this is going. I do know this. If I put this out on the street, it would be in someone's house. I know it because I've seen it happen. I've seen people come and say, I want this. So that's the beginning of an artistic career. That's the beginning of this artistic career for me. Is this high art? Is it art? I don't know the answer to that. I don't know where it's going. I have no idea. But I do know that I'm in a building with people that make things, and everybody's going, what stuff is going on? Like, not making anything is a thing. I turn wood and make wooden bowls that are beautiful, huge, and they sell for a bunch of money, and nobody uses them as a bowl. They put it up on a mantle as a centerpiece. In truth, that bowl is a sculpture of a bowl, because you don't use it as a bowl. It's really just a sculpture. We have all kinds of things in our house like that. Everybody does. What is a paperweight? Some pretty thing. Nobody puts a whole paper. It's not a thing, but you know they sell in charity shops. I just don't know if somebody will pay enough money for this for me to support myself. I don't know. I do know that when I finish something like this, several electricians have come up and said, oh, that's a closed circuit sign for a computer board. I'm like, no, that's not it at all. What is it? I'm really fascinated by shapes and symbols that suggest a meaning. Is it a double button? Is it a doorbell? Is it half a donut? It's pine and red. Pine came from Google. They gave you the pine and some boxes left over. And red came from somebody's deck. That's recycled steel. This is all recycled walnut and maple. And you never ever buy anything to make these things. It's always scrap. But we hear about artists at the end of their career. We read about artists after they've been successful and famous. This is the very beginning. And I don't know what's going to go, but I don't know. So, thank you.
Pete, come and take a bow. Yeah. told you that we never know what we're gonna see
Yeah.
Monday night march.
Right?
Here's a perfect example.
Never
Wow.
seen that before.
Amazing. Yes,
Right?
and as, let me, get my piece of paper so I can introduce our next performer while JP is kindly moving his, artwork out of the way. I'm only gonna go partly down. So, I don't know, this is imperfect, but hey, it's a mark, right? The performances are what it's about here. Okay, our second performer tonight is Yvonne Baginski in How I Became an Environmentalist, a love letter to Sheedy Creek. For 20 years, Yvonne has walked a narrow asphalt path tucked next to a creek in the midst of the Napa County Industrial Park. It's called Sheedy Creek. But she didn't know that until this year. This is the story of how a young woman from Detroit, Michigan became an old woman rallying for the life of a small and consequential creek in Napa, California. And now, please welcome Yvonne Baginski and How I Became an Environmentalist.
Listening to JP a little bit made me think a little more deeply about my own journey and about creating that path that we ended up walking on. And I moved to Napa. We were talking about this earlier. I moved to Napa about 32 years ago, and it was a river town. It was a place where there were fields and there were places to go, but there weren't the restaurants and there weren't the wineries that we see today. And over the years, one of the things I do to relax was take long walks. And I had two very, very large dogs, Armando and Ramona. And I had to find a place for them to run and chase and have a wonderful time. And I discovered a little south of Napa, a huge area that was all wetlands and paths. And it looked like it was a place that was going to be developed into a corporate park. And I started walking there because there were already sidewalks established. And I could walk through these sidewalks, through these fields, and my dogs would chase rabbits. And there were probably 20 or 30 rabbits in the fields, and Armando would take off, and Ramona would take off. I wouldn't see them. I wouldn't see them for like an hour. And then they'd circle back, and their tongues would be hanging out. They'd be covered in ticks. And I would throw them in the car, and we were going over. Nope, they had to go jump in this little creek first to get soaking wet. And this little creek would kind of meander along, and next to the creek was an asphalt path that they had poured. Now, someone had restored that creek, and I didn't know how or who or why, but someone had placed riparian habitat. They had placed some bushes and some grasses along that creek. So over the years, all of these plants started to grow up, and pretty soon, it was like a screen from the rest of the park. And so I could walk through this path, and I was totally alone with my dogs. And then I'd come out into an opening, and I would look out, and there was the Napa County Airport. And then I could look up and see the mountains all the way in Sonoma County. And it was just beautiful. It was like I had my own little paradise. And I would go out there 2 or 3 times a week. And people would say, oh, you should be out there by yourself. You never know who's out there. I was always out there by myself. I had my 2 dogs, but I never felt afraid. I didn't even feel alone out there because there was always things to see. There was egrets, herons, and there were little birds that were everywhere, and there was beavers in the water, and even coyotes. One time, I was walking with my dogs, and I got way into the wooded area. And as I was coming out, it had rained, and the fields were flooded. In those days, the fields were flooded, and the water was probably about this high in the fields. I didn't want to go in there, so I was walking along the path, and I looked, and here comes a lone coyote. It was a young male, and he saw us, and I immediately grabbed those dogs and I held them. Now, my dogs were not little dogs. My dogs were Irish Wolfhound mixes, Irish Wolfhound and Corgi mixes. So they were a little difficult to handle. They had not seen the coyote yet. And that coyote, he walked right across that field, got to the path, and sat there, looking at me. And I looked at that coyote, and I held on to those dogs, and it started to rain, and there was no place for me to go except through that field. Now it was starting to get dusk, starting to get dark, and that I wasn't even carrying my phone with me. And that was the thing about being out there. You were really, really alone. Now, as the years passed, I started noticing more buildings going up. The kind of buildings they put up in corporate parks are these 50,000 square foot warehouses to hold the wine, to hold the packaging, to hold the corks for the winery industry that was starting to really boom in Napa County. They also started putting in office buildings down there where they would ship things out. So as I was walking now, I would start seeing litter. I would start seeing trash. I would start seeing bubble wrap. I would start seeing pieces of cardboard. And when the workers started coming to the buildings, I started discovering fast food containers, Camel cigarettes. I started walking now with a grabber and a plastic bag. And I would fill up a plastic bag every time I walked. It was only a couple miles, but I always managed to fill up a bag with Modelo bottles, pizza containers to 7-Eleven, cigarettes. And I started doing it every single week. And I would take this when I was all done, it'd be all bulgy, and I would throw it in the garbage. And there was always trash. There was always more and more trash. And I started seeing trucks coming in because these delivery trucks would be these enormous trucks. They would line up along the court. And the men who were in these trucks would sleep in them, and they'd leave the engine running. So as I was picking up the trash, I would walk by these horribly smelling diesel fuming engines. And there's always a chihuahua barking at me from inside of one of those trucks. And they'd be sleeping in those trucks, the engine going. And I'd start picking up bags of, the Safeway bags, the white plastic bags. I started picking those up until I noticed that in those bags were feces that were being thrown out of these trucks into the field. And I was saying, this is absolutely disgusting. And I thought, what kind of people would litter like this? But that's what I was doing. I'd go out there and learn. Now, I have a college degree and I did some postgraduate work, and I thought, God, picking up litter may not be the best use of my time, but it certainly gave me a place to meditate and think about being human on this planet and what we're doing to the planet and what we were doing to these fields. So, the years passed, and I thought, am I an environmentalist? Am I an activist? No, I had a little business I was running. I was raising my children. I was worrying about paying my mortgage. I read all the articles about climate change, and I thought, well, what can I do? What can I do to make a difference? So, I bought bamboo toilet paper. I stopped using paper towels. I hung my laundry outdoors. I try to walk anywhere where that was less than 3 miles. But I thought, am I really doing anything to save the planet? Am I doing anything to make a difference? So about 4 years ago, I ripped out my entire front lawn, and I planted all native plants and drought-tolerant plants. I was so proud of myself. It cost me $6,000 to make that little transformation. But the city of Napa paid for part of it, and the state of California paid for a part of it. So I thought, I got myself a pretty good deal. So I had my entire front lawn transformed into a mecca for the birds and the butterflies and insects. And I would sit in my window and I would look at my beautiful front yard and I would watch it grow. And I was so proud of all the little animals that were coming to it, all the cats in the neighborhood that were now coming and hiding under the bushes. And I looked out over my neighborhood at all the green manicured lawns that are edged perfectly, and all the landscapers that come out there with their leaf blowers, blowing the leaves every Friday off the lawns. And I said, why don't other people follow and do something like I'm doing? Because I don't have to work on this beautiful native plant garden. It all seems to take care of itself. So I'd go across the street and I try to convince my neighbor with the perfect green lawn and the manicured edges. I go, you know, when you look out the window, what do you see? And he'd say, I see a mess. And so he actually reported me during the pandemic to the city for having a fire hazard in my front yard. And the city called me up and they said, hey, Yvonne, we understand that you have, your lawn has grown and has become a fire hazard. And I remember we're in the middle of a pandemic and I said, I'm home, come on down and take a look at it. And they said, send us pictures. And I did, I sent them pictures. And of course, it wasn't a fire hazard at all. But just goes to show how different people see things. He would look out across my yard and see what a mess. And I would look across at his yard and I said, how can someone worry about having a green lawn? So a couple of years into the pandemic, I decided to retire from my job. And I had started a nonprofit where I recycled medical supplies and reused home health equipment. And so I had this huge transition of going from elder care and working with medical supplies. And I thought, what am I going to be doing next in my life? What is it that I'm drawn to? And I really couldn't find it. I didn't know whether I wanted to go back to being a writer, which was my original work in college, or a newspaper reporter, or a spiritualist, or a tarot card reader. I had all kinds of ideas of what I would become, and I still couldn't grasp it. So I'd walk out to Sheepy Creek, I'd grab my grabber, and I'd walk along the creek and pick up trash. Funny how it's right there in front of you, you don't see it. So there I was at the creek one day, and somebody had dumped so much trash that I couldn't pick it up. There was 2 containers from Coca-Cola that were big plastic containers that were full of something, and I couldn't clean it up. And again, as I was walking down the path, they were building another behemoth winery warehouse. And I looked at the warehouse and I looked at the diesel and I thought, what do I do? Who do I report this to? What do I do to get this diesel fuel out of here? So I started making calls. I called the Napa County. I called the Environmental Services Division. I called the Napa County Sheriff. I called the American Canyon Mayor. I got in my car and I drove to the Coca-Cola plant in American Canyon, which, by the way, you can't get into. There's a guard, there's a gate, and there's a woman with very long purple fingernails encrusted with rhinestones who will not let you in. And I gave her my card and I said, can you please tell somebody that I'd like to speak to them? I'll wait at the front gate. I'd like to speak to them about containers from Coca-Cola that were left on the side of the creek. I waited 45 minutes. She came out, she said, no one's going to come out and speak to you. So I didn't know what to do. And I called the sheriff, and the sheriff's office is about a quarter of a mile from this creek. And he said to me, where is it? And I said, it's on this creek. There's a little path. He goes, never heard of it. So I had to explain what it was, and he got down there and he said, I don't know what to do. And I said, but you're the enforcement person for this creek. He said, I don't know what to do. So I called the county. The county said, we're going to send somebody out, because I kept making calls. 2 weeks had passed since I found those 2 Coca-Cola containers. He gets out there with me and we're walking down this path and he said, I didn't even know this place existed. Well, that's the blessing of the place, is that no one knows it exists. And then he said, you shouldn't be coming down here. There might be needles. There might be things, people down here that could hurt you. And I was walking, so I had my big dog with me, and I was walking with him. And I go, I'm not really worried about that, but I am worried about these 2 containers. Well, he said he was going to look into getting them removed. And he did. About a week later, I went back, and they were all gone. He said they were filled with gasoline. Somebody had left 2 large containers right next to the creek of gasoline. Now, going out there as often as I had for 20 years, I started feeling like that creek was my creek. I started feeling that whenever I saw a Modelo beer bottle or a piece of styrofoam or whatever, that somebody was littering my creek, my property. And I started getting very proprietary about it. So the next time I saw them come through and tie orange and plastic and green bows around when they do the landscaping, before they do the grading, they do the surveying and the measuring. The next time I saw them do that, I walked and I pulled every single one of those off because those were my trees that they were messing with. And they were going to start working with my land. We started building and we started grading. And the animals started to disappear. No more rabbits. No more birds. I didn't see any hawks anymore. One day I'm walking along the path. There were two vultures sitting up on a roof looking at me. And that was the first birds I had seen in a while. And I thought, damn it, they're not going to get away with this. I'm going to find out who was responsible for this creek. I'm going to find out who takes care of the waters here, who makes sure that this creek is going to survive. And they started building the one winery on the right. They put in a giant fire retention pond. The fire retention pond means that the stormwater from all that cement they're pouring into the parking lots is going to go into that fire retention pond before it goes into the creek. So it'll filter through the ground before it goes into the creek. I am not a scientist. I'm not a wildlife biologist. I know nothing about engineering. Absolutely nothing. All I know is that when I was walking that path, that water from that fire retention pond had gone over the pond, down the path, and into the water. And with it had ripped out a large amount of vegetation. Now, I don't know who called this. Does anybody here know who called? You see something like this? You always assume that the people who are working on this project would repair it, would fix it. This was this last December. I didn't know. But what I did know was that a few months earlier, I had decided that I was going to become an environmentalist, that I was going to become an activist in my community and start taking responsibility for what I saw. I didn't know how to do that. How do you become an environmentalist? I had no scientific background at all. So what I did was I called up an environmental organization called Napa Climate Now, and I said, I'm interested in becoming a member of your organization. How do I do that? And a man pulled up on a bicycle a few weeks later, and he gave me a Napa Climate Now cup, a bamboo toothbrush. He gave me a steel straw, and he said, there's a film and a Zoom meeting that we're going to have next Saturday. We'd like you to see it. So I sat on a Saturday and I watched film, and I watched an orientation, and I listened to the meeting, and I got very, very depressed because the news isn't so great. And so Napa Climate Now said, we understand that the news here that you're looking at isn't so great, so we want you to have a positive attitude. So the positive attitude is not on what is going on, but what can each of us do to make a difference. In that process, I also joined the Sierra Club, which all of us are familiar with. And the Sierra Club sent me back. So when you join these clubs, you get stuff. You get little environmentally friendly stuff. So this says Sierra Club. So now you all know I'm a member of the Sierra Club as well as Napa Climate Now. Since I decided to take responsibility, do something to make a difference, I have been involved in testifying before my city council. I have been involved in researching, investigating, and working to stop a ready-mix concrete plant from opening up on another creek a few miles down from my creek. I have reported that fire retention pond to the state of California and had it repaired. I have walked many, many miles and taken a look at many of the creeks that have been altered and the streams that have been altered in Napa County through the vineyards. I have become involved in my first protest outside of the Napa County Supervisor's building, where they called us protesters, all of which we were all over age 60. They called us green peaceniks. It was my very first protest, and I to be called a green peacenik is very different than what I'm used to. And I also became very aware that as one person out there by trying to work and save one creek isn't enough. It's not enough to do it. Yesterday, before this event, I decided to go walk the creek one more time to kind of refresh myself on where I am. My dog has since died. My dog died 3 months ago after swimming in some water. After he chased a rabbit, actually, in another place and swam in some water. On a Saturday, he was fine. By Wednesday, he was dead. I didn't know how to get the water tested to see if there was anything wrong with it. And every place I had called, nobody could help me, including we couldn't even find out who owned that water. That's how difficult it is to get information. So what I did is I went and I walked the path. And as I walked the path this last Saturday, I saw that they had taken the field, the one field that was still clear, and they have dug it all up. It's getting ready to become graded and getting ready to be built. And it's an enormous field. It was the main field. And as I was walking, all I could see were vultures. They must have dug up and killed a lot of lizards and snakes and whatever else was out there, because all I saw were 10, 15, 20 vultures all over the place. And as I walked along, after 20 years of enjoying that creek and loving that creek, I realized that I couldn't stop the progress that was being made in that area. And I thought, you know, what can I do? What can I actually do to do something that would make a difference, that would make a change? And my question to all of us is, it's not the bamboo toilet paper, it's not the it's not hanging your clothes outside, not riding your bike. It's all of it together. It's a cumulative work of everything that we do that's going to make the difference. And I was especially discouraged, and I kind of slowed my action down. And I thought a lot about well, what can I do now? The plant's not coming. The ready-mix concrete plant is not coming to Napa. I have started an investigation on the bait stations where they're killing all of the rats, where the hawks were taking the rats that were then poisoning the hawks. There's so many targets. There's so many ways that each of us can make a difference. And as I was worrying about all this and thinking about it, I thought, well, maybe I'll just stop. Maybe I'll just go back to what I was doing before. And I got a card in the mail out of the blue. And I opened it up and there was no return address on it. And I was feeling a little discouraged, and I opened it up and it said, Yvonne, a good deed doesn't evaporate and disappear. Its consequences saturate the universe, and the goodness that happens somewhere, anywhere, helps in the transfiguration of the ugliness. Desmond Tutu. Thank you for your service to the Napa community and the many lives you've touched. A secret friend. Whoever wrote this to me, whatever time they took to do it, and when I received it, were all perfect. It was exactly what I needed to hear in order to move forward in this.
Veronica, please take a bow after that wonderful story. All right. Thank you for that, Yvonne. Our final performer tonight is Alyssa Gersay in Indonesia. Alyssa is a longtime teacher of young students and a new student of storytelling. Tonight's piece is about her trips to Indonesia which she first took with her German mom in 1980 when she was 9, then again when she was a teenager, and finally when she was an adult in 1992. And now please welcome Alyssa Kursani in Indonesia.
All right, picture this. It's 1980. I'm 9 years old, and I'm getting off an airplane in Jakarta, Indonesia. I am trying to figure out what I'm doing here. The smells are all different. I grew up in South Jersey, where yes, people smoke cigarettes, but not the kind they smoke in Indonesia. That's pungent flow cigarette. It's like nothing else. You taste it when you breathe. And then there's all the sounds, the little motors that South Jersey doesn't have. South Jersey has big trucks and big American cars, and it's wildly different to my little 9-year-old self. And then I'm trying to make sense of, why am I here with my German mom? I'm not there with my Indonesian father. I'm there with my German mom, and it's not making sense to me. And why did my German mom bring her 3 children to Indonesia? And for that, we'd have to go back to 1964, where my mom just lived life differently. She lived in Brooklyn, had a good job in New York City, in Manhattan, where I think most people would think that's a good life. But my mom wanted something different. She wanted adventure. So she heard of this job with the government that would take her to Jakarta, Indonesia. In 1964, I'm not sure how many people knew where Jakarta, Indonesia was, and I think it's very few. But that's what my mom wanted to do. And so she did the interview for the job, and it turns out she mostly just got the job because her name is Elliot. It's a family name, it's a man's name. And so she mostly got the job to go to Indonesia because they thought she was a man. When they found out she was a woman, it was too late for the paperwork, but my mom didn't mind. That's the way she rolls. She just does things. So she's in Indonesia. My dad's in Indonesia. My dad is in a little village in North Sumatra called Sriwedolok, and he's the oldest of 11 kids. They send him to Medan, maybe slightly larger little village in North Sumatra, to get an education. He was going to be the one person in the family to go do that, and he showed promise. So he did that. He got an education in Medan, and then did so well there that he was able to go to Jakarta and get a job. So my dad is just stepping way out of his little village and being wildly successful. And in Jakarta, this is where my parents meet, because my mom likes to do things differently. So instead of eat with all the other English-speaking Americans or other English-speaking government workers, my mom finds the one woman who thinks like her, and they go eat in the streets, and they go learn the language. They meet these Indonesian men, and they start dating. Her friend Julia meets someone, start dating. My mom meets my dad and start dating, and they date, and then my mom has to leave. There's a little thing called unrest in Indonesia shortly after she got there. So my mom was probably there for a year or two, and then the job's over, the country's in crisis, and she leaves. But they correspond, and correspond so much that they make plans to get married, and they're going to get married at the Canadian border. So my dad chose from a little village in Sriwedolok to a big city, Jakarta, but then to the big city, the Big Apple, New York. And I, as a little kid, just always was amazed by that. Like how many people have a story like that? I think very few can say tiny village in North Sumatra to the Big Apple. So my dad was just larger than life for me as a kid, and as if that wasn't enough, he applies to the Columbia School of Journalism, gets in, does really well there, and gets a job in Atlantic City as the editor-in-chief. So all growing up, I'm just thinking how amazing that my dad's doing this in his second language. He has gotten a journalism degree and is now working for the Atlantic City Press, and that's just incredible. And in addition to that, my dad was a photographer, just a side gig. Again, I don't know how you go from a small village to learning how to develop your own photos, but my dad did that. He had his little Nikon camera, he took pictures of us. They were beautiful, they were fun, and then we would develop them in the basement. And for those of you not from the East Coast, a basement is a little room underneath the house where you can put a dark room, and you can have fun down there, or it can be really scary, and you have to run up the stairs and turn off the light at the last minute. But it's a space under the house, and that's where we had this dark room. And I got to go into the dark room with my dad and watch the photos develop from one pan to the other and leave with that smell on our fingers. And it was just, as a little kid, just a precious, precious experience. And I took that to high school and took my own photography class in college and just loved that mixing of chemicals and developing the photos and watching the image appear. But right. And we're getting back to 1980. So my mom takes us to Indonesia, takes us all around. She's got this way of traveling, one thing after the other. But in that time, though I didn't have the language, because America was not welcome to families speaking two languages. My parents didn't teach us Indonesian. My brother and sister and I really picked it up quickly. And so we got to enjoy our time there. We got to go to the market and bargain with people. We got to talk with our cousins and kind of could understand what our aunts and uncles were saying. And it became a lovely time. And still a little confusing for me as a 9-year-old why my German mom was there. And then at the end of the trip, my dad shows up. And it's still not explained to me. I guess, again, I'm the youngest, 9 years old. No one was explaining everything to little kids. But what I gathered is that my parents had divorced a few years ago. And now my dad was going to stay and live in Indonesia. Right? America is not welcome to two languages. He really had to try to speak English all the time, and he wrote it incredibly well, obviously. He got the job at the Atlantic City Press, but speaking it, there's the accent, and that's not so welcome in the United States in the 1980. So my dad decides he's going to stay there. That's kind of all the information I got. So I left Indonesia in 1980, feeling really crushed, really sad, really kind of lost, because I'm no longer going to be dad's little girl. I'm not going to develop the photos with him. I'm not going to do fun things with him. Instead, I'm going to be at home with my mom, who he called a nag, and I understood that as a 9-year-old. I do your chores, your homework, I go nag, like I understood that. So it was kind of making sense. Oh, I get it. Well, I can't. But I can't go to Indonesia. I have to stay here in South Jersey and live with my mom. So that didn't feel good. And for 5 years, it was kind of like that. Just my siblings and I living with my mom. And then, 5 years later, 1985, my sister and my brother and I got on an airplane and we fly to Indonesia, just the three of us. My oldest brother, there was an oldest brother, didn't come. But the three of us flew over together, and it felt kind of cool. Like, we had, still, not 5 years later, not many people knew about Indonesia still, so we had the airplane to ourselves. We had a lot of seats for ourselves, a lot of space spread out, and we got there, and I was thinking, this is going to be it. I'm gonna have this time with my dad who I miss so much, and it's gonna be so much fun, and we're gonna do all the things like we used to do. But we get there, and what I remember is mostly working. He kind of took us around, but I already seen those sites 5 years ago. I already been home. I've seen the shadow puppets. So kind of not the most exciting thing. We had a relative, a second cousin or something, hang out with us. I learned how to drive stick at age 14, so that's cool. That's a strong, fond memory from that summer. But we didn't develop photos together. In fact, I'm not even sure if my dad took his camera out. And he did get us this membership at a pool, so we could go swim and have fun each day, but that's the three of us walking to the bus stop and taking the bus. Not that kind of family. And then, on top of that, there was my dad smoking. My sister and I had asthma. And we were all in New Jersey. My mom would nag my dad about smoking. I didn't think it was a big deal when I was little. But we get there, I'm 14 now, and I'm aware that for the last 5 years, I've been really healthy. I haven't had an asthma attack. I haven't missed a sick day in school. No smoking in the house. And so my brother kind of takes this position and confronts my dad. Why are you smoking? Why don't you stop smoking? We smoke away from the mid-asthma. My dad didn't really change his smoking habits. Kept at it, so again, kind of leaving this country, feeling like, what is going on? Now, I don't have a real father. There's no connection there. Got my naggy mom back in the States. But I get through high school, and I go to college, and then the summer I turn 21. I take the trip just by myself. I go to Indonesia. And I think this is gonna be it. This is the trip. I wish I could tell you this is the trip where we sat down and we had that talk and we really connected and understood, I'm an adult now, we can have that conversation. Why did he leave the country? Why didn't he come back? Why doesn't he talk to my oldest brother? We could really connect on these things. We just talk. I'm an adult. We don't have that conversation. It's very defensive. Well, your brother changed his name and I don't recognize the J. So, as if that's not bad enough, I see, it's not even like, it's the person. I watch him talk to the people that are parking the car, serving the food, and he's kind of rude, kind of embarrassed. And I spend time with his brothers, we spend time with much, and they're lovely. So it's not like a family trait, this is my dad. So it's kind of corny to say, but it's kind of like how I watched my dad's photos develop in the trays when I was young. That only took a few minutes. This other development took many, many years. But I finally, at the age of 21, was able to see my mom, not as an act, just a single mom with 4 kids. Of course she's going to tell us to get everything done. How else is the house going to function? How is the dinner going to get on the table? How are the dishes going to get done? How is the laundry going to get folded? How are we going to wear clothes? She's a single mom raising 4 kids. Yeah, she's probably going to nag a little bit. So I'm an adult now. I'm able to go home, talk with my mom, ask her questions. Instead of me just thinking she's so odd and different to go to Indonesia, I ask her questions and get her story. And I start to appreciate, she's really odd. She's really different. Other moms aren't like that. And so I have a love of travel now. I have a love of doing things differently. And it's a day late, but I would like to take this moment to say, Happy Mother's Day, Mom. I love you.
Don't steal.
Take a bow.
That's
All right, let's have all our performers back on stage, grab some chairs, and I'm gonna turn the house lights on and take us some questions you might like to ask.
Oh, you know, I'm like. So I will get there. Thank you.
I was just congratulating our canine member of the audience for
That stayed quiet.
for being so
the whole
quiet
time.
and so nice. So we had 3 wonderful stories
Yeah.
tonight. So anybody have a question they'd like to start with?
I would just have a 100.
Jackie's up. Good
Yeah,
question.
I would just have 100. It's so interesting that all 3 of you have discovered yourself, and yet you're all on the stage together tonight, because that doesn't always happen here. Did you all know that this was like a self-revelation night or something, or you found yourself, each person? It's very interesting that each of you have done that, and yet you're all on the stage together. I find that fascinating, that each in your own way and stuff. And I know that's not a question, but a couple of the questions would be, you know, you go through life and you look for stuff. Are you doing the right thing? Do you dig your parents? Can you make money? What can you do to help and everything? But how did each one of you know when it was it? Like you're searching, and then you just are walking there one day and realize you get this letter that says, don't give up. You do art and you take these funky triangles and make art, and you're tired of furniture and you finally appreciate your mom. I mean, was it just a moment that happened like instantly, or was it building to it and you just were finding your way? I mean, each one of you could kind of answer that, because they're all a little different. You know, anybody want to start with that? Environmentalist lady?
I think that the journey of trying to find out who you are is lifelong.
Yeah.
And I think that at one point in my life, I was a mom, and now I'm a grandmother. And each time I played a different role. But I think with the environmental, I never thought that I would move into this direction. I don't have a scientific background, and I don't have any kind of engineering skills. But I did discover that it was something I felt very passionate about, and it really drove me. The passion itself drove me. It wasn't about making money. It was not about filling time. It was actually doing something that I would lose time in. I would start doing it 4 hours or past it.
So something spoke to you about what you were doing. And it sounded like that with the wood too. Is that how that was for you, when you put your triangle pieces together and made something?
I'd love to say there was some epiphany that it really isn't like that. It's over time. And maybe the difference right now, part of it is COVID, really. Nobody else would be in the shop. I run a building with a lot of people, and somebody had to go and collect the mail, somebody had to go and make sure packages were brought in. I don't know, hours by myself. My wife is a teacher, my son was in school, they were both Zoom schooling from home. I couldn't see clients, couldn't see anybody, so a lot of it, just time without anybody around. And then just for me, just the fascination with being shaped until it becomes something else. bunch of people died. My family, my wife's mom died, my dad, my grandmother stuff, not from COVID, this was, but over a space of a few years. And I actually think some of that was ringing a bell, like, you don't do it now.
Yeah.
You know, some of that for sure. But it wasn't a big change.
Uh-huh.
And it's still, I don't know.
Well,
Like, I really-
interestingly enough, were you looking for a change consciously, or you were just doing what you're doing and it slowly crept in?
It's creeping in,
Yeah.
definitely creeping in, and I mean, it's a great thing to be able to make a table that somebody uses. That kind of satisfaction. Less than 1% of people on the planet get.
Right.
You know, I mean, not an abstract thing. I make a thing that is a thing that will be used long after I'm dead. That's an amazing gift to
Right.
have the world give you. But what's up to do? Hopefully, you know.
Yeah.
I did not see it coming, actually. The time between the 14-year-old visit and the 20-year-old visit, there was no close sister connection with my mom, really. In fact, years later, we could laugh about the story, and I only recently told my kids because they're teenagers now. When I was in high school, I think we barely talked, we didn't get along, and so sometime in college, I met all these women who had this close relationship with their mom. They would talk about it, and then I would go home and talk to my mom about it, and she said, "Well, I was going to take you to Disney World when you were in high school, but you were such a bitch." And I was like, "Ooh, well, maybe if you'd taken me to Disney World, I wouldn't have been so bitch." So that was the relationship was that no Disney World, but the growth as an adult was that we could laugh about it.
Yeah.
But I didn't see it coming. I think it was just, again, seeing my friends who had these close relationships and thinking, maybe there's something there. And then going to see my dad and realizing there's nothing there. It just made sense to kind of try to develop it.
You laugh with your dad now?
What's up?
Can you laugh with your dad now?
Well, my dad's dead now, but no, we never got to that place. No, he came and visited. Finally, after decades, he came to visit when all four of his kids have parents now. So 2005, so many years after that last visit, and it was nice. As a new parent, I was kind of like, oh, my life is now my kids. It doesn't really matter what's going on there. I'm here to have like his memories for my 1-year-old to take pictures and develop them and share them when he's older. And I didn't think we'd have many more visits actually, and my kids would get to know him, and they did have their own relationship, and it'd be special. But there was nothing. That there was no really. It was lovely though that we got to see my first child.
It's just interesting, all three people came with a change and an awakening in life and stuff at the young stage there. And will everybody pursue what they're doing? You'll pursue environmentalism, you'll pursue some personal art, and you'll pursue writing and relationships or performing or?
Yeah, and this storytelling is pretty new for me. And in fact, so I told stories to children for years. It took years to get comfortable doing it. I taught with other teachers who were amazing. Thought, I wish I could do that. So it took years of developing over that time, but they were usually on the spot. Kids ask, they want to hear a story, kind of tell a story, and tell it over and over. A Halloween story or a sister story. They just want to know things about us as people. And so I would tell those, and then I go, well, what happens if I do it the other way? What happens if I write the story down and then tell the kids? And that's how I first told the story about my mom taking us there in 1980. And so that's its own kind of little story. And that was sort of this first step in this direction of like, yeah, I'm gonna try telling stories. Am I going to pursue it?
Yeah.
You know, I am. I think that having the 20 minutes, there was so much more to tell of some of the other experiences I had in just a very short period of time, only 5 months. And I feel that passion towards that, and I don't know how, I feel like it's kind of like taking an onion and unpeeling it and trying to get to the core of it. So for me, I did not expect, one of the things I didn't talk about was I did not expect to discover the bait station traps for the rats, that there's over 500 of them in the corporate area, and they're just slaughtering food supply for all those animals. And I didn't have a chance to really go into that story of what I discovered and how that was handled. So I think there's a lot more in the storytelling, and I also recognize that in telling stories, we really tell our truth and connect with people, and so these stories need to be told as well.
Yeah, very encouraging. And you're gonna pursue your art?
Definitely. I call it 3D graffiti because I really view it as graffiti almost. And I really enjoy hanging it up out in the world. I pulled back from that. I just hung it where I could see people see it, to just keep, to some ways, when you make things, you work alone in the room and you don't get reaction. You don't get any applause. There's no crowd saying they like this thing, they don't like that thing. And then when you make furniture, you make it for an audience of one. And so this thing of seeing stuff out in the world, seeing cars pull over and look at it, and like people stealing things, and it's very interesting to me. I don't know how monetizing the thing is not that important to me, but I do have those else. And if I put things out in the world for free and people steal them, so there's this whole other world of NFTs and how art is sold and things. And I'm not ready for that world. I'm still learning. I know some of the images I make could go that direction. A friend of mine who's a painter who just did his first couple of NFTs. He was like, I've got this woman in LA. She wants your stuff. She wants to do this thing. And I'm like, ooh, I don't even know. I don't know what that means to me. And I'm more concerned. I don't need to make that much money. So maybe a year from now.
You want people to just enjoy your work? Is that?
That's the first thing. That's
Yeah.
storytelling. And this thing that we do, even though there's, for people in the audience, and I know two of them very well, Yeah. But we're this thing where we share. I mean, the greatest thing is that the audience was interested. That's the first thing, that I entertained them. And this art thing is similar to that in some ways. I'm putting an idea out. And if the idea appeals to people, it's so great to see that. Most artists don't get to see the people enjoy their work. So the graffiti, where I can see the graffiti, where I can see people who drive by my window, it's very interesting. The guys from the water department came and asked, this is in Alameda, they asked in Public Works, could they take one and put on their door? And it's just a blue circle. And I said, how do you know I made it? And they said, we know you made it. No, I made it. And so they took it off the wall, and it's on the front of Public Works. And I just couldn't figure out why, and then I went there, and it's the logo is a circle, and they just think it's part of their thing. But I'm fascinated by this. I love hearing this stuff and sharing it. I enjoy that very much. And I wish that there was the fact that we try and save the free.
Well, that's an interesting thing that happens here often is that performers start admire each other's work and learn from it. Anyway, Jackie has always, thank heavens, she's got a lot of good questions. But let me just check and see if Abdul or, I'm not sure of your name. I don't want to say wife of the performer, but Abdul, do you have a question or either of you?
I asked a question.
You did,
Yeah.
yeah. I just want to see if you have anything else. I am curious, unless you were ready to go, to ask maybe a final question. And you kind of, all three of you, to some extent, kind of started to answer this already, but I mean, people tell stories all the time, right? You meet up with your friends, you have coffee or whatever. We are, that's what we do by nature, we tell stories. But not everybody has a desire to get up on a stage with stage lights on, to tell stories about their lives. So you each have these three things that are really important to you. I mean, Alyssa, I can sort of see, but I'll let you tell me, but I guess just what made you wanna get up in front of other people? I mean, we had a small but very attentive audience, but they say that getting up and speaking in front of people is the thing that scares the hell out of most people. So why do you want to get up and tell these stories?
Yeah, but I think with the short answer is, the longer answer is, it's been a wild arc for me. I mean, the other part, there's actually so many mom stories. My mom is sort of larger than life, and she commands a room and has a loud, booming voice. And so as a kid, I was always kind of shy and reserved anyway, and so I didn't need to talk. My mom would answer for me then, and so it's sort of strange to go from that to now again more of the mom space. Like, I'm going to use my voice, but it's been all these decades of teaching and getting comfortable with kids. Like, I could talk to a room full of kids for ages. But then back to school night, when the parents came, my heart's pounding. I'm like, oh my God, I'm keeping with this. And then realizing, after doing that for 10 years, I'm like, oh, look at me, I'm back to school night, and I feel comfortable. So then it's that realization of oh, I can do it. And if I like telling stories to kids, maybe I like telling them to adults. But it's really been just this long transition from not wanting to speak, rarely even have spoken to actually, I'm going to do this. I want to share this story. I told some people about it, so why not tell more people? But I really go back to I don't know, because it doesn't it doesn't make sense in my first half of life. Maybe it'll make sense, and I'll have an answer after I do it for longer.
Thank you.
I love stories. I love listening to people tell their stories. I also know that when I tell my story, I'm often interrupted. I'm often having people commenting on it while I'm telling the story. So telling the story to an audience gives me space to tell the story. And so I so rarely am able to tell the story without interruption. And almost everybody I know interrupts me constantly. And I also had that mother who would speak for me. So I like having the space to tell the story.
Wow, that's amazing. I think one answer I've never heard before, but it totally makes sense.
Yeah. I was reserved. I held back. I went ahead.
I mean, it's a great observation. I view storytelling, what I do tonight is just, it's the thing that's interesting for me. I don't think it's a story necessarily. I think it's a lot of storytelling. I enjoy it quite a bit. I view it as liberating the bus stop. And I'm driving the bus. Well, you do that. interrupted. That's a really fabulous activity. When it works the best, I am. We all try to hang our own personal thing on there. My relation with my father, when it works, you look through your eyes and then experience it. Share. It's a great thing.
I think actually, when I get out of that list of, I love stories. I love stories from comedians. I love stories from the vault, serious, heartfelt, all the wide range of stories in plays, stories in poetry. And I think, yeah, over time, I just thought, well, if I'm enjoying their story, maybe. Because we all, this is what I learned going to all these storytelling events. We all have stories, right? We all have these ways to make connections with each other. So, yes, it's this new opportunity for me to share. But yeah, I do. I love it.
Well, all three of you were
Yeah,
terrific tonight. You
fabulous.
really were. So final round of applause here. You and audience for coming, and Abdul, I know you'll be back here next week, so you'll be on stage. And in 2 weeks from now, the three of you will be back.
That's my show next week.
Yes.
So thank you all.
Thank you
So
so
many of you for coming.
much.
Good job, good job.
Hey, but see.